What if one moment of kindness could change everything you thought you knew about success? Imagine an undercover CEO stepping into his own restaurant and uncovering a truth that could shatter his world. Welcome to Whisper Fable, where hidden stories reveal the heart of humanity. David Harrison had built his restaurant empire from nothing, starting with a single diner 40 years ago. Now at 62, he owned 17 upscale establishments across 3 states. But tonight, something felt different as he walked through the rain toward his flagship restaurant in downtown Chicago. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit or driving his luxury car. Instead, he looked like any other customer seeking shelter from the storm. His gray hair damp, and his worn jacket telling a story of ordinary struggles. What he was about to discover inside would shake him to his core and remind him why he'd fallen in love with the restaurant business in the first place. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places. And tonight would be one of those nights that changes everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever walked into a place that felt wrong? David pushed through the glass doors of Harrison's Prime, the restaurant that had started his journey to success. The warm lighting and gentle hum of conversation welcomed him, but something felt off. The usual energy seemed strained, like a guitar string pulled too tight. He decided on this impromptu visit after receiving some troubling customer complaints about service quality. And he wanted to see things from a customer's perspective for once. The hostess barely looked up from her phone as she grabbed a menu. "Just one?" she asked with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. David nodded, noticing how she seemed more interested in her text messages than in making him feel welcome. She led him to a small table near the kitchen doors, the kind of spot usually reserved for customers they didn't expect to tip well. As he settled into his chair, David watched the dinner rush unfold around him. Servers weaved between tables with practiced efficiency, but their smiles seemed forced, mechanical. The laughter from the dining room felt hollow, like actors playing their parts without feeling the joy of the performance. This wasn't the warm family atmosphere he'd worked so hard to create when he first opened these doors. Then he saw her. A waitress in her early 40s stood near the service station, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that had seen better days. Her name tag read Linda, and there was something about the way she moved that caught his attention. While other servers rushed past tables with barely a glance, Linda paused at each one, genuinely listening to her customers, refilling water glasses before they were empty, and somehow making each person feel like they mattered. But David noticed something else, too. The way the younger servers whispered when she walked by, how they'd roll their eyes when she offered to help with their tables. Linda carried herself with quiet dignity, but David could see the weight she carried in her shoulders. The way her smile flickered just slightly when she thought no one was looking. The evening crowd was demanding tonight. A businessman at table 12 snapped his fingers impatiently. A young couple complained loudly about their appetizer, and an elderly woman seemed determined to send her soup back a third time. Through it all, Linda moved with grace, handling each situation with patience that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. David ordered a simple chicken dinner, nothing fancy. He wanted to observe, not draw attention to himself. As he waited, he watched Linda juggle 6 tables with the kind of skill that only comes from years of experience. She remembered that the man at table 8 preferred his coffee black, that the woman at table 4 was celebrating her anniversary, and that the teenager at table 6 was nervous about paying for his first real date. But then David saw something that made his chest tighten. Linda had just finished serving a particularly difficult table when she stepped into the small alcove between the kitchen and the dining room. For just a moment, when she thought no one could see her, her composure cracked. Her hands shook as she wiped her eyes, and David realized with a shock that this dedicated employee was quietly crying. David's food arrived, brought by a different server, who barely acknowledged him. His attention remained fixed on Linda, who had quickly composed herself and returned to her tables with that same gentle smile. But now he could see what he'd missed before. The slight tremor in her hands, the way she took deep breaths between orders, the careful way she counted her tips as if every dollar truly mattered. As the evening progressed, David began to piece together Linda's story through careful observation. He watched her handle a spilled drink with patience, while the customer berated her for ruining his expensive shirt. She apologized sincerely, offered to pay for cleaning, and somehow managed to turn his anger into grudging respect. When a family with young children struggled to keep their toddler quiet, Linda didn't just take their order. She brought crayons from behind the counter and spent a few extra moments making funny faces that had the little boy giggling with delight. "Excuse me, miss," David called softly when Linda passed his table. She turned with that practiced smile, but up close he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that comes from carrying more than your share of the world's weight. "Yes, sir. Is everything okay with your dinner?" "Everything's wonderful," David said gently. "I was just wondering. You seem to really care about this place. How long have you worked here?" For a moment, something real flickered across Linda's face. 8 years next month, she said, and there was pride in her voice despite everything. I started right after my husband passed. Mr. Harrison gave me a chance when nobody else would hire a 40-year-old woman with no restaurant experience. David felt something twist in his chest. He remembered that hiring decision, but he'd never followed up to see how it turned out. That must have been difficult, starting over. Linda's smile became more genuine. It was scary, she admitted. But this job. It saved us. My daughter was only 10 then, and I needed something stable. The people here become like family, you know, even when times get tough. Before David could respond, the manager, a sharp-faced young man named Craig, appeared at their table. Linda, you're needed in the kitchen. There's an issue with Table 9's order. His tone was curt, dismissive, and David didn't miss the way Linda's shoulders tensed. Of course, Linda said quickly. I'm so sorry, sir. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. As she hurried away, David found himself studying Craig with new eyes. Throughout the evening, he watched as the manager treated his staff like interchangeable parts rather than human beings. He saw Craig publicly embarrass a young server over a minor mistake. Watched him roll his eyes when Linda suggested they comp dessert for a customer celebrating a birthday. And noticed how he seemed more concerned with cutting corners than creating the kind of experience David had always envisioned. The breaking point came near closing time. David saw Linda approach Craig with what looked like a scheduling conflict, speaking quietly and respectfully. But Craig's response was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. If you can't handle the hours, maybe you should find another job. There are plenty of people who'd be grateful for your position. If this moment is stirring something in you, have you ever felt unseen at work? Share in the comments below, and stay with Whisper Fable for the twist that changes everything. Linda's face flushed, but she simply nodded and walked away. That's when David saw her duck into that same alcove. And this time, the tears weren't quick to stop. David couldn't sit still any longer. Something was fundamentally wrong with the place he'd built, and it went far deeper than poor service. He waited until Linda emerged from her moment of privacy, then caught her attention as she passed. Miss, could I speak with you for just a moment? I promise I'm not complaining about anything. Linda hesitated, glancing nervously toward where Craig was counting down the register. I'm sorry, sir, but we're closing soon, and I still have tables to clean. Please, David said gently. Just 1 minute. I'm a business owner myself, and I think you could help me understand something. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Linda sat down across from him, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Up close, David could see the calluses on her fingers, the way her uniform had been mended at the seam, the weariness that went bone deep. You mentioned you have a daughter, David began softly. She must be in high school now. Linda's face brightened despite her exhaustion. She's a senior. On a roll, wants to study nursing. She's everything to me. Then her expression clouded. But college is expensive. And with my hours being cut. She stopped, looking embarrassed. I'm sorry, you don't need to hear about my problems. Cut hours? David asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Linda looked around nervously, then leaned forward slightly. The new management philosophy, they call it. Fewer full-time employees means lower benefit costs. I used to work 40 hours a week. Now I'm lucky to get 25. And they hired 3 part-time servers to replace 2 full-time ones. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I've been looking for a second job, but nothing pays enough to make up the difference. David felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. That must be incredibly stressful. I love this job, Linda continued, and David could hear the desperation she was trying to hide. I love making people feel welcome, being part of their celebrations, helping families have a good night out. But I don't know how much longer I can make it work. My daughter's applications are due next month. And I promised her I'd find a way to help with tuition. David watched this woman who'd given 8 years of her life to his restaurant, who treated every customer like family, who'd been quietly holding everything together, while his manager systematically dismantled the culture David thought he'd built. He saw her count her tips again, her lips moving silently as she calculated whether she'd have enough for groceries this week. Have you ever talked to the owner about these concerns? David asked carefully. Linda let out a soft, bitter laugh. Mr. Harrison? I've never even seen him. Craig says he's too busy with his other restaurants to worry about individual employees. Besides, what would someone like him understand about trying to raise a daughter on a waitress salary? The words hit David like a physical blow. Here was someone who'd been loyal to his vision for 8 years, and she believed he didn't care enough to know she existed. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. At that moment, Craig appeared beside their table, his expression thunderous. Linda, what are you doing? You have side work to finish, and I'm not paying you to chat with customers. David felt something shift inside him, like a dam breaking after years of pressure. He stood up slowly, his full height making Craig take a step back. Actually, David said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made the remaining staff turn their heads. I'd like to know more about this new management philosophy you mentioned. Craig looked confused, then irritated. Sir, we're closed. You need to settle your bill. And my name is David Harrison, he said simply, and watched as the color drained from Craig's face. And I own this restaurant. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth. Around them, the few remaining staff members stopped pretending to work and stared openly. Mr. Harrison, Craig stammered, his earlier arrogance evaporating. I had no idea. I mean, if I'd known you were coming. That's exactly the point, David said, his gaze never leaving Craig's face. You had no idea I was here. So, I got to see how you really run my restaurant. How you treat the people who are the heart of this business. He turned to Linda, whose face had gone pale. 8 years ago, I hired a woman who needed a fresh start. I remember now. You came in wearing your best dress, nervous but determined. And you told me you'd work harder than anyone if I just gave you a chance. Linda nodded wordlessly, tears beginning to flow again. I kept that promise to work hard, she whispered. Every single day. I know you did, David said gently. And I failed to keep my promise to you. I promised you'd be part of a family here, that you'd be valued and respected. Instead, I got so busy building an empire that I forgot why I started this in the first place. He faced Craig again, whose face had now shifted from pale to red. Cutting hours to avoid benefits. Treating loyal employees like disposable resources. Creating an atmosphere where someone like Linda, who represents everything good about hospitality, feels invisible and undervalued. Sir, the quarterly reports show increased efficiency, Craig began. The quarterly reports don't show Linda staying late to comfort a customer who just lost their spouse, David interrupted. They don't show her using her own money to buy crayons for children. Or remembering that Mrs. Peterson likes extra whipped cream on her pie because it reminds her of her late husband's favorite dessert. David pulled out his phone and made a call. Patricia, it's David. I need you to process a termination effective immediately. And prepare a management transition plan for Harrison's Prime. He glanced at Craig. You can clear out your office tonight. Then he sat back down across from Linda, who was staring at him in shock. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. If you could change anything about this restaurant, what would it be? Linda looked around at her coworkers who were listening with rapt attention. I don't know what to say. Start with what made you love working here in the beginning, David encouraged. What's changed? If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to Whisper Fable for more heartwarming tales. And slowly, Linda began to speak, not just about schedules and policies, but about the soul of hospitality that had been quietly dying in his restaurant. 3 months later, David stood in the same spot where he'd first seen Linda crying. But everything had changed. The restaurant hummed with a different energy now, genuine warmth that couldn't be faked or mandated from corporate headquarters. Linda approached him with a smile that reached her eyes, no longer the tired, careful expression he remembered from that night. She wore a new name tag that read Linda, Assistant Manager, and carried herself with a confidence that had been hidden for too long. The new training program is working beautifully, she reported, her voice full of enthusiasm. The staff retention rate has improved by 60%. And customer satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 3 years. David nodded. But what pleased him most wasn't the numbers. It was seeing Linda's daughter, Jessica, working part-time as a hostess, greeting customers with the same genuine warmth her mother had always shown. The girl was saving money for nursing school, but more importantly, she was learning the value of treating every person who walked through those doors with dignity and respect. Tell me about the scholarship program, David said, though he already knew the details by heart. Linda's face lit up. We've already helped 5 employees' children with tuition assistance. And the community response has been incredible. When people see that you genuinely care about your workers' families, they want to support the business. She paused, then added more quietly. I never thought I'd be able to help other families the way you helped mine. But now Jessica's full scholarship means I can pay it forward. David smiled, remembering the day he'd called the nursing school personally to establish the Employee Family Scholarship Fund. It had taken one phone call, but Linda's tears of gratitude that day had been worth more than any quarterly profit report. The evening dinner rush was beginning, and David watched as his staff worked together with a synchronization that spoke of mutual respect rather than fear. New employees were mentored by veterans like Linda, who taught them that hospitality was about making people feel valued, not just efficiently processing orders. You know, Linda said softly, I used to think success meant just keeping your head down and surviving each day. But working with you these past months taught me that real success is when everyone around you rises, too. David felt his throat tighten. You taught me something, too, Linda. I'd forgotten that the numbers on a balance sheet don't mean anything if you lose the human connection that makes it all worthwhile. As the evening progressed, David made his rounds, as he now did every week, not as the intimidating CEO checking up on his investment, but as someone who genuinely cared about each person who made his vision possible. He listened to concerns, celebrated small victories, and made sure that no one would ever again feel invisible or undervalued in his restaurants. When he finally left that night, David looked back at the warm glow spilling from the windows of Harrison's Prime. Inside, Linda was training a new server, patiently explaining that the secret to great service wasn't speed or efficiency. It was remembering that every customer was someone's parent, spouse, or child, deserving of kindness and respect. Sometimes the most powerful changes come from simply remembering to see the humanity in the people around us. If you enjoyed this story from Whisper Fable, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining Linda and David on this journey of rediscovering what truly matters in business and in life.